Welcome to episode 601 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and I'm all alone today because I just wanted to stop in and say hello. As I had mentioned in the previous few weeks, that even though 600 was a huge show, I've got some things going on in the background personally. It is that special time of the season between the last season and this season. Now, there was the Summer of Soccer, as it was called here in the U.S., with the Euros and Copa America and with the Olympics coming up. But with the Barcelona news kind of on the back burner quite a bit and transfer rumors even dying down while the Euros and Copa are going on, that has given me some opportunities to take a breath, kind of reset a few things here behind the scenes. And I do appreciate all the time that everyone's afforded me to have off. But we still do have to get into our daily, and by daily I mean weekly dose of Barcelona news. But what a better way to do that than with an oldie but a goodie, one that Francesc Tomas used to have on the Barça blog, that being barcablog.com. That still exists, but he used to do these maybe multiple times a week even, the top 5 news of the day. For this is kind of a top 5 news of the last few weeks. While not only have I been away, but we haven't really discussed them on the show. So he was kind of a catch-all for everything that you would have missed over the last few weeks, either from me or even in the Barcelona universe that may have gone quickly through the news cycle. So without further ado, let's get into episode 601 and this top 5 here on the Barcelona podcast. Topic 1 is going to be the Euros, and believe it or not, I'm going to say Lamine Yamal. I'm going to save his name for second. We're going to start with Nico Williams because he's involved in both the Euros for Spain and winning it all, and he's involved in all the transfer news really that's going on with Barcelona in totality. As much as we want to talk about a pivot or any other player coming in, it seems like Kool-Aids might have to wait, and we're going to answer that question, by the way, in a later topic. So for Nico Williams, the news at present day, and this has been reported by all the big names, including Fabrizio Romano. So Nico Williams, the idea that Barcelona is his priority and Barcelona has him as their primary priority, regardless of position. The idea would be a lower wage to start and increasing during his 5-year deal, which is what it would likely be. The order of operations for this coming week would be personal terms agreed with the player. Then Barcelona would have to get La Liga approval, barring FFP, to activate the release clause. And we know that that is somewhere between 55 million and 58 million euros. So in theory, just talking about the transfer, this one would account to about 60 million euros. And then when we're speaking about those personal terms, he does currently make around a reported 10.4 million euros, which for a player of his caliber does put him right around a little bit less than Rafinha and just around the same number as Ansu Fati, which I do think is fair value for where he does fit. But the question would be if then he's going to start at the wage that he had at Athletic Club, that again 10.4, and then it rises over the next 5 years. That could, by the end of this deal, based on everything else, put him at a pretty high number. In theory, Barcelona is still buying a player for the future. And if he's going to get better than he has been even this summer and last season for Athletic Club, then by the time he's 25, 26, he might be worth something like 17 or 18 million, whatever the increase would be at the end of that deal. So I know it sounds scary when we talk about wages, and people have even said, isn't that what Bartomeu did with his deals, where he had them shorter in the beginning to get the transfer done, and then they would increase later on, and Barcelona would be bit by that? Yes, but as long as that 5th year, while it is increasing, doesn't increase by such a number that it no longer is reasonably fitting into any wage bill, that would be a worry. So right now, what I know, I'm not too worried about his contract, and I think it would all be fair. Next up, let's talk about a player at the Euros that we know will be in a Barcelona uniform for quite a while, I'm hoping at least. Lamine Yamal, he created, I guess I'll start with a number here. He created 8 big chances in Euro 2024, the most at any single Euro tournament since 1980. I feel like I could talk for 30 minutes on all the different stats and records and whatever he has, but I think this is the one that seems to cut through the noise the best. 8 big chances at the Euro, that being again the most at a single Euro tournament since 1980. The next best is 5. And 12 different players had 5 big chances created. It's pretty incredible what he did with this run. Assists against Croatia, Georgia, Germany, England, and then a goal against France. And what a goal it was. It wound up being the goal of the tournament. So Italy, the only game that he played in that he failed to grab a goal or an assist. And after that game, I even spoke with Lamine, and we discussed how even in that game when he didn't have a goal or an assist, there were 4 or 5 moments when his fingerprints were on that game. He was obviously the young player in the tournament, and coming into this season, having just turned 17 3 days ago, you get the sense that he is going to be the consummate starter at Barcelona. And at this point, when I read the other stats for him, most chances created in the tournament, 19. Most open play chances created, 16. Most big chances, I already said, created 8. Joint most goals plus assists with 5. Most assists, 4. And obviously, as I said, the young player in the tournament, as the youngest player in history, not only to win the Euros, not only to score a goal in the Euros, but even to play in the Euros. It is unbelievable what he's already done at this point in his career. The hype train has not only left the station, but it is zooming down a path at speeds that make me uncomfortable. So all I ever want to say about Lamine Yamal is please stay healthy, stay grounded, and stay on whatever trajectory he is on, because even with a young player like him that that the sky is a limit, it seems like he's breaking through where I even considered he could be at this point, at just a 17-year-old who just turned 17. Here's your negative, and it's barely a negative at all. It absolutely pains me to say this, but Dani Carvajal definitely elevated Lamine Yamal's game in the tournament. He made him better, and I thought Carvajal was excellent at the Euros. Again, it pains me to say it. I cannot stand Dani Carvajal as a player, not necessarily as a person. He's a Real Madrid player, but with how important he is for Real Madrid and the character that and qualities that he is, the same thing. He's Real Madrid's Jordi Alba when it comes to personality. So very much like Jordi Alba was hated by Real Madrid fans, Dani Carvajal, I give him the same. But yeah, he made Lamine Yamal even better, and he was fantastic in that tournament. And overall, Luis de la Fuente's Spain were simply terrific. Rodri, as I had said with Lavon, deserved to be the player of the tournament. Spain had a vision and a plan. And so even when Pedri went down, it was Dani Olmo straight into the lineup, and they didn't miss a beat against France or England. Fantastic by Spain from the opening match against Croatia all the way to the end. They deserved to win it. And very rarely, I feel like, in the big international competitions, does the quote-unquote best team win it. But from start to finish, they were the best team in the competition. So congratulations, most importantly, to Lamine Yamal, Pedri, Ferran Torres, and Fermin Lopez. Fermin Lopez, good on you. I know he didn't see any action, but having already won a Euro. And then I think the last thing really to speak about in the Euros was the team of the tournament. That's always a debate that people can have. So let's have a little fun with that here for a second. Nico Williams, Musiala, Lamine Yamal were your front three. And I totally agree with that. I thought Musiala was really special. And when Germany didn't have answers throughout this tournament, he was one of the players that did. And I even thought going into the knockouts that Germany and Spain had been the most successful. And if you had told me in hindsight that if Germany had won that match, it would be them raising the trophy at the end, I wouldn't really be that surprised. So Musiala deserves his spot in there as the only German. And then Fabian Ruiz, Olmo, and Rodri, I think that has to be right as well. Dani Olmo with his important goals in the knockout, especially against France. Fabian Ruiz, he had his goal. Rodri was the best player in the tournament. I don't know how you go with anybody else. Yes, there were good players in the tournament, but I think that's totally fair for Spain having won it in the end. Cucurella, same thing. I don't think he gets that spot. I don't actually know who you would give it to, but I think that's his spot because Spain won it all, and he was so important to what they were doing. As I mentioned before the knockouts, William Saliba, I thought was the best center back in the tournament. I think he definitely deserved to be in team in the tournament. And then Akanji for Switzerland, same thing. Switzerland were playing really, really well, maybe just on the backs of what they did against Italy. Akanji was important to Switzerland, what they tried to do, how they built out of the back. And I think it's a fair argument. As much as you'd love to put one of the Spanish center backs in there, I think it's a fair argument that Akanji deserves his spot. And Maignan in goal, I guess so. Unai Simon, I think also deserves to be there. But goalkeeper is really, really hard. I actually would have loved to give it to Georgia's Mamardashvili, who plays for Valencia. But Georgia as a whole did give up too many goals in the tournament. But I really did think just his performances in the tournament were fantastic. Again, his team get up the goals, but he had so many fantastic saves. But I get that you give it to Maignan because that France back line was one that barely could concede at all. And Spain were the ones that put them to the sword as well. And then the right back. That's the fun one where they totally got it wrong. I know that it felt like the committee had to say, England made the final. We got to put an England player in here, but they did not play that well in this tournament overall. They got the results they needed. They probably should have been shocked by Slovakia in the knockouts and not even made it as far as they did, but they were able to squeak by with a victory over Slovakia, that 2-1 in that knockout. And then, yeah, they figured it out, got all the way to the final. But overall, I would have been fine with no England players. But Kyle Walker winds up getting a nod. I guess that's where you put him because you can't really fit anybody else in there. Maybe you could make an argument, honestly, for Mainu over Fabian Ruiz or Olmo. I think that's where I would jam an England player if I had to. I thought Mainu was just really good and consistent in this tournament. But the right back spot absolutely had to be Carvajal or Jules Koundé. Those are the best two right backs in the Euros. That's it. Enough said. For topic 2, it's going to be much shorter than topic 1, even though it's a similar competition, the Copa America. Unfortunately, I think this is one of the least fun I had with the Copa America. I know that Messi won it all in the end, and this is his last one and all those things, but he also didn't. He was knocked off in the final, had that huge ankle injury. And I think all the off-field stuff, and yes, it was in the U.S. here, but all the off-field stuff, especially for me, wanting CONCACAF to do well. The United States struggled in this tournament. Not that I root for Mexico, obviously. They're the rival of the U.S. in that, but I do hope that CONCACAF teams like Mexico do well in the tournament and show out. And I think that North American soccer in totality is better when Mexican soccer is on the up, but it's not at the moment. The Canadians with Jesse Marsch did rather well, but they weren't playing, I would say, a fun style. They were just kind of getting by. And it was so jarring, I think, every day. Maybe I was spoiled because I watched the Euros first, but to watch the Euros, then to watch Copa America, the number of fouls, and some people enjoy it, but it's just not for me. The amount of intensity and how it seems like the first 10 to 15 minutes, I don't know if it's the level of refereeing, but it seems like South American and North American and Central American teams, they push these referees to have to decide the games in ways that it doesn't necessarily happen or at least it didn't happen, fortunately, this time around in the Euros. So I do feel like this tournament, that being Copa America, it's a real shame. I feel like it's going to be overshadowed by what happened both in the semifinals between Uruguay, who were the best team in the tournament, by the way. They were the most fun team to watch in Copa America, but being overshadowed by Uruguay players and Colombian fans at the end of that match with the families and all that. And then what happened prior to the final in Miami. And very much like what happened a few years ago for the Champions League final in France, I think it puts a black mark on the entire competition, unfortunately, because those are the things we remember. And you can throw blame at CONMEBOL, who are the organizers, or in the stadium, the United States. Was that stadium prepared for this kind of thing? And how much do you put it on the fans as well? Just acting out. And if you don't have a ticket, why would you feel compelled to break into a stadium and feel like you deserve to be there just because you feel like you can do that and emboldened to do that because you believe that there's no ramifications, even if there is ramifications from security or law enforcement, that the punishment is worth the crime? That's all frustrating. And I think it does overshadow and puts a bad name on football in the Western Hemisphere. There were some good stories there, but I also feel like with Copa America that based on where a lot of the players do play, like James Rodriguez, who was fantastic for Colombia, helped spur them to the final and was assisting and looked like himself back, maybe not in his Real Madrid days, but looked like his old self and looked like he could contribute to a team in Europe. But that's a weird thing about Copa America, that you could have these players pop off or look great. And then you're like, well, they do play in Brazil or Argentina, or they play in Mexico, and their level might just be a mid-table team in Italy, or it might be a mid-table team in the EPL. And you never know where these players are going to wind up. And it just feels like Euro, we're speaking about players that can break out and then have an outsized role in a European team. And of course, non-EU places also matter and contribute to the number of players that you could fit in, the level that's required. But you feel like if they're starting for their national team and playing in these huge matchups of the Copa America, they'd be good enough. But it just winds up not being the case. You'll have MLS players getting all the way to the semifinals. And that's not to disparage MLS, but you also know that top teams in Arsenal and Barcelona and Real Madrid and AC Milan aren't necessarily looking to sign the best players on some of these MLS teams that are playing for Canada or for Ecuador or for Panama or for Venezuela. And that's just the way it is. So I just feel like Copa America winds up being this standalone competition that happened, and then everybody kind of moves on from it in a way that Euros can more feel, because of the players and the personnel and all that stuff, can bleed into the European season. So those are just my 2 cents on Copa America, but I totally understand if the United States had gotten all the way to the final, how I'd be probably having a different tune. But the way they crashed out, I think it did unfortunately bias me in a negative way towards the entire competition of what I was watching. Topic 3 is the Araujo injury. Unfortunately, this is the big news here. Barcelona defender Ronald Araujo set to undergo surgery on the muscle injury he picked up while playing for Uruguay at the Copa America. This muscle problem, he then goes to Barcelona on Monday, that being yesterday, and the decision was made for him to have an operation, which will be taking place under the club supervision in Finland. And if I'm not mistaken, people can correct me on this, there is a doctor that Barcelona generally uses. I think that's where Gabi went, and Ansu Fati as well. They went for their operation to the same doctor in Finland. But even if they trust the doctor, this is still really huge, unfortunate news because he'll likely now miss the next 4 months. Best case scenario that we've heard, mid-November. Worst case scenario, the new year in January for a player that has struggled with injuries and also recovering from injuries as well. So that is going to give Hansi Flick an issue, I'd say, because he's now has to start his preseason knowing he wasn't going to have Eric Garcia and Pau Garcia, who are at the Olympics. So now he's looking at Andres Christensen and Inigo Martinez, Jules Koundé, and Mika Faye, because they can all play center back. But if you wanted Koundé to play at right back, that'll complicate things, especially to start this season. Inigo Martinez is likely now to be registered, but it wasn't a guarantee that he was going to be registered. And then Christensen, with De Jong and Pedri likely out, we don't know what Hansi Flick was going to do, but having him be as an option with a defensive midfielder that Barcelona seems to not be looking at, a high-level defensive midfielder. Instead, they're looking at bringing in Nico Williams. So does that mean Christensen's going to be needed in midfield? So that puts question marks. And then Faye, of course, didn't even make his debut for Xavi, was frustrated, wanted to go to Porto. And I'm not sure what's to all to say about the center back position. All we know is probably Pau Garcia is going to come back from the Olympics and be written in stone as he started for the first half of the season if he can stay healthy. So Barcelona, once again for the second straight season, putting a lot of their faith in Lamine Yamal and Pau Garcia as 17-year-old kids to help them all out. But yeah, this is bad news all around, because even if Ronald Araujo was the odd man out and they were going to try to, we'll say, get a cheaper center back, but he does, as I remind people, have a pretty friendly wage as far as team-friendly wage that doesn't affect the cap too much. But any idea that he was now going to be leaving for some big money, that's thrown out the window. And the club, I think, with his injury, they also have to consider now mid-November means that you have an entire month and a half that he would be eligible to return. So I think they're going to register him anyway. But if they do get in a bind and choose not to register him, let's see the surgery goes in a way that they say he won't be back till January. I think you don't worry about registering him till January and you kick that can down the road. That's a problem they had, but you never know who's going to go down. And you hope no one does, but you worry about that later. And you try to ship out somebody who doesn't necessarily want to be there come January, and then you try to register him January. But I still think he'll be registered from the start of the season, especially if they believe he can be back somewhere in November. On to topic 4 with the Patreon questions that remain unanswered from 600. So we're going to carry these over. Patreon Simon, do you find it concerning that the board seems to prioritize another position, that being left wing and Nico, than a defensive midfield position for yet another year? It's been at least 4 to 5 years. What I do think is true is that Hansi Flick is coming in and wants to play a double pivot. And he does trust the players he has, whether it's Gundogan, Gavi, Pedri, De Jong, and there might be another midfielder on their way after the Nico Williams deal is done, somewhere between 15 and 35 mil. I don't know who they would get for 15, but I think maybe you can get some kind of rotation piece who is your 5th or 6th. And I think he's also taking a look at the players we spoke about in Marc Casado. We're not still sure about Sergio Roberto, what's going to happen with him. Who knows where Marc Bernal fits and all that stuff, as now we're talking about the 5th or the 6th midfielders. So we're not exactly sure what Hansi Flick is thinking, and maybe he's considering, hey, as long as Nico Williams can be brought in as a winger and we can score some goals, I do trust that I can figure out exactly who I might need to identify by January. And you obviously don't want to put all your eggs in a basket of January transfers. That never, ever, ever works. But I think it sounds like Hansi Flick is kind of okay with testing out the players that he has at his disposal at the moment, including Christensen. Who knows what will happen with him either here in this first half of the season, and Araujo in that center back stuff that we mentioned. So is it concerning? Yes, because the absence of Sergio Busquets last season was the biggest omission from 2 years ago to last year. It was a major issue that got much worse when Gavi went down as well. Barcelona just do not have a lot of natural ball winners, which means they have to have a system and they have to work as a unit to get the ball back and win the ball back. And I thought the press at times was worse than it had been in the previous season under Xavi, especially going back to 2021. It was worse than that. So that took a step back last season. I thought Barcelona's rest defense, which is kind of along the same lines, their rest defense last season was poor. And I thought a defensive midfielder bringing in that kind of player would help them out a lot. But if Hansi Flick has a system and can get them to play as a unit, am I concerned? Yes. But I am hopeful that Hansi Flick is going to be able to solve some of those problems, or at least improve upon them, and have this team clicking and find out what they need come the second half of the season when it's time to win some trophies. Patron Daniel, who in practice has more influence over Barcelona's transfers, Deco or Jorge Mendes? And what does Deco actually do at Barcelona? Deco is a sporting director. The only thing I'll say is that Deco has a lot of people in his ears. he was an agent, so he's pretty well tuned and understands the market. I think he's pretty timely with the things he's trying to do. He has his own stuff that he wants to work through. He's getting some feedback from Hansi Flick, but I think generally he gets feedback from his scouts, many of which he has in Brazil, in Europe, and around. And I do think, this isn't a defense of Deco, but I do think we put an outsized amount of responsibility on the main sporting director, because it's true. I think he has his hands in everything, because if things go wrong, he's the one who gets blamed for a bad transfer, and he's the one who gets praised for all the good transfers, as well as getting praise for the scouts. Sometimes those names get leaked, so we also praise the scouts who find certain of these unearthed gems. And I do think Mika Faye, if he does break into the first team, maybe we already know who the scout was, but I don't think it was actually Deco who was watching the second league in Croatia to find Mika Faye. So whatever scout found Mika Faye will get his credit if Faye breaks in. But yeah, Deco, when things go wrong, it will be on his head. And Jorge Mendes, of course, because of the number of players for Barcelona that he does represent, it's not that he has a huge influence. It is just that to do business, he's an agent that is working with Barcelona on a number of these different players. And I think you'd hope that in good faith, every player and every operation is different, but you do know it overlaps. And Deco, while he was born in Brazil, he did play for Portugal. And Jorge Mendes is Portuguese. And there are relationships. So how much influence does one have of the other? I think Deco still makes the decisions, but yeah, Jorge Mendes does have an uncomfortable amount of power, I think, behind the scenes in terms of what's happening with Barcelona, because I think at any point, I know Lamine Yamal was raised in the academy, but Lamine Yamal's contract negotiations are always seemingly going to go through Jorge Mendes. And as much as he wants to stay, Barcelona know they're going to have to play some kind of ball with him. And lastly, not a Patreon question, but I did get a question about the Ronaldinho print that I have behind me. That was made by listener Blair Skivington. And you can find him on Etsy or through his Instagram. That's Blair, that BlairSkivington. So thanks again, Blair, for that print. Again, you can check him out on Instagram or Etsy. And he made me this nice Ronaldinho one and shipped it. So again, thanks again so much, Blair. And now topic 5, that's all the other quick fire news. Let's see how much we can get through. I don't even think I have a response to a lot of stuff, just the news if you missed it. Julian Belletti, who I did get to meet. Here's a weird picture of me with my eyes bugging out of my head, but it was really hot that day. I think it was last summer. I'm excited to meet Belletti. That was where I also met Pedri's father. So he's going to take over as coach of Barça Juvenil A team. So I guess he gets a thumbs up for me having met him. Belletti will take over for Oscar Lopez, who fortunately, he would be a huge loss if he leaves, but it sounds like after 6 years with the U19s, he'll now be taking over other development tasks. I'm not sure exactly what that means in the academy, but he will have, I'm hoping, another overseer role where behind the scenes he can be working with many different generations. That would be good for the club, and I would hope Oscar Lopez as well. Now, Eric Garcia, Pau Cubarsí, and Fermin Lopez are all off to the Olympics, and hopefully all three star in that competition. I would expect Fermin Lopez, Cubarsí, and I think Eric Garcia too, all to be 3 locked-in starters for that team. We'll have to see how it goes. Alex Garrido to undergo surgery, another one on his foot. That's a real bummer for him. We just talked about him a few weeks ago on the La Masia update show, and this is kind of more confirmation as to why I had him where I did on the list of what I thought of his future with the first team. I just think there's too many injuries at a point where he, at his age, really needs to be playing. It stinks. It really stinks for the young player. And with all these players, even if they don't make it at Barcelona, I always want to see all of them make it at the highest level they possibly can. And who knows what the future holds for any of these kids when they're 27, 28. It might be time to return if it all works out. Mikel Merino is rumored to be available for $20 million, which would be, I think, a sweet deal for him, even though there is just 1 year left on his contract. So that is a bit for 1 year left, but it also means that you're bringing him in and then you can immediately sign him. So that's a bit different than other sports. Like, again, we're not going to get in the NBA and second apron, all this boring stuff that you don't care about if you're not a basketball fan. But I think that would work out great. They bring him in, maybe they can re-sign him on a 4-year deal, which I think at his age takes him right over that 30-year threshold. So if Hansi Flick likes him, thinks he fits in that double pivot, which I think he would fit in that double pivot, I would like to bring him in. That would make sense to me. And I would think it was a success this summer if Barcelona were able to bring in Nico Williams and Mikel Merino, and then they rounded out with the returnees and other young players. I think it all makes sense for everybody. Tony Fernandez now talking about some of that preseason stuff that we've seen. He was the only real surprise in the preseason young player list for me. I thought he'd be another year away from training with the preseason in the first team because he was only 15. Well, he just turned 16 yesterday, by the way. And I do think that his selection does seem to perfectly coincide with his signing his renewal again, as he turned 16 yesterday and was able to sign that first professional contract. So he was called up along with 15 other players were called up to first team training with Hansi Flick. Pau Preem is the one, I'd say, surprise omission. I thought he'd get a call up. His contract is in flux, but it seems like he wants to stay. So I was surprised not to see him there with the first team. And Danny Rodriguez isn't there, if you're going to ask, not there because he's with the Spain U19s. The other 16 players who were called up, though, Tony Fernandez, Guy Fernandez, the two cousins, 16-year-olds, Kim Junet, Andres Cuenca, Hector Fort, Mark Bernal, Noah Darvic, all 17 years old, Diego Cochin, 18, Unai Hernandez, Mika Faye, Sergio Dominguez, the center back, all 19 years old, and then Mark Casado, Angel Alarcon, Ander Astralaga, all 20 years old, Trilly and Gerard Martin, Trilly 21, Gerard Martin 22, and a lot of the names that I think I'm hoping to see playing in those huge matchups, at least on paper, against the big teams here on the U.S. tour for the preseason tour, those 3 matches. I expect to see the names that I mentioned as I go back now 2 weeks to La Masia stuff. My opinion on these teenagers has not changed. So the ones I thought we'd see then are the same ones I thought we'd see now, with a bit more of an outsized role of Mika Faye. It seems like now with the Araujo injury, he will be sticking around. Barcelona have confirmed that the Juan Gamper Trophy final will be played on August the 12th at the Estadi Olympique Luis Campañas against AS Monaco. So that is now scheduled August 12th. That should be a fun one. And then not sure in what capacity he's involved, but it does appear that Thiago Alcantara will be helping out this season as a liaison between Hansi Flick on his staff and the players. He did formerly play under Hansi Flick when they were both at Bayern Munich. So as a Spanish speaker, Thiago Alcantara could be a much more important role in this team than it looks like he would have on paper. And I'm excited to see what he could do. And it's always fun to bring back one of the old hats, and nice to see immediately going from retirement to becoming a coach. You always kind of knew that with Thiago Alcantara, that he was likely going to be moving into coaching before too long. So he's likely getting, I would assume he's trying, or maybe already has his coaching licenses. And this is only his first step into what will likely be some kind of head manager job somewhere in the near future. So those are the 5 topics. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again for those Patreons, for those questions. If you want to get your questions answered, become a Patreon for as low as $3. You can ask me at any point, and if I see it, I'll respond to you, let you know that it'll be asked then on the next show, and I'll get to it. You can also follow along, even in the off season, Twitter or X, Instagram, the closed Facebook group and Discord. That's where these communities are as well. And then, of course, a good rating on the podcast app, subscribing to the YouTube channel for free, a huge help as well. And just as a programming note, I'm going to be away, continuing to be away for the next few weeks. Now, do look out. Again, keep subscribing to everything. Keep looking out. I will try to have a show every week this summer, but if there's going to be a week off that I have, it will be the next one. I am officially doing the move next week, so we'll see if I have some kind of topic or show. Now, if a big transfer breaks or Nico Williams or anything like that, I will be focusing on that next week. But if it's a slow news week, you might hear from me even next weekend or the following week sometime in there. So that's just a quick programming note. But don't worry, once the season kicks off again, you'll hear from me plenty, as you always do. And most importantly, I hope you have a great summer. Thanks so much for listening to the show. When there's news, when there isn't news, when we've got top 5, when we only got a top 1, and the days when we got seems like a top 50. Until next time, I'll talk to you soon, and Forza Barça.